So, good morning again. My name is Miko Pawlikowski. You might have seen me shout things about chaos engineering at some point in time. If you did, talk to me later. So there are a few things that I realized as I was trying to prepare this. First was that I really hate preparing PowerPoint slides. So I didn't. Instead, I decided to go for a form that's probably a little bit more aligned with the actual storage, in my brain, which is a graph. So you don't get slides from me today. Instead, you get this, boxes and arrows and some GIFs in between. So I was trying to come up with a nice presentation about how SRE, from my perspective, has changed over the last few years and what it actually meant to me. And I realized that there's a few problems with that. First problem is that when you actually ask two people about their definition of SRE, you probably get three different answers. And I would like to think that this is not necessarily because we're bad at our jobs. It's probably because it actually means different things to different people. So, if I was to ask you, what's SRE to you, what would it be? I've got some keywords here, but before we go there, let me just point at you. What's SRE to you? Yeah, handling operations, exactly, right? That's definitely one thing. And look, I actually had it a little bit here on my keywords. What else is it? Anybody with the, this kind of feeling about the SRE situation? Firefighting, right? We all do that. Hopefully we do that less than we do other things. What else do we do? Anything about automation? Any friendly faces? Oh, come on, guys, tough crowd. What was it?
Efficiency improvement and automation.
Efficiency improvement and automation, yeah. So we talk a lot about toil elimination and automating and making sure that all the things that are repetitive go away, right? This is definitely part of our job. What about the reliability, right? What do we do about that? SLIs, SLOs, we like throwing these words around, but they really come from the applications, right? And we're there to more kind of ensure that they're monitored, that they're visible, and that they're met, right? So, as you can see, it's not exactly super easy to come up with a definition. And there's been a lot of people trying to come up with the definition for it, right? If you go onto Wiki, obviously you're going to see things. And we can see 2003, that's where it all started. By the time we're putting this together today, there are thousands and thousands of people on LinkedIn who have SRE in their title. By the way, so how many people actually have the words SRE in their title here? Hands up. That's about 10 people. Okay, who would like to have the words SRE in their title? And that might be one of the reasons why they're here today, to learn about that. Oh, great. 3 people. What's everybody else doing here then? Right. So when I zoomed into this, there was a lot of faces. They were a little cringy. Yeah, I can feel the pain, right? So the firefighting, incident mitigation, and both in the past, right? For the past incidents, we want to learn from them, and we want to mitigate for the future, right? So a lot of keywords there, probably better format to how it's actually stored than a bullet point on a slide, but it's a little messy, right? And then it gets even messier, right? When we go and we try to actually establish who's doing what, right? I don't know if you can see that, it's actually quite small, but I added a little box called SDLC for Software Development Lifecycle then, and things get even more tricky, right? Because at this stage, we add things like build. Is that our job? Who thinks it's our job to work on the build so that that's reliable? Okay, 4 people. Everybody else thinks it's somebody else's job. What about the release process? How much time do you actually spend making sure that the release process is reliable, that we don't mess things up as we push the code in there? Who would say it's at least 25% of their time? 10% of the time? Jesus, am I the only one? Okay, fine. 15 people there. Who's doing capacity planning? Do you have a person doing that? There's a guy doing capacity planning. Thank you. For everybody else, do you have a different person doing that for you? No? Okay, great. What about the deployment, the continuous deployment aspect? Do you set up the tools for other people to use that? Do you maintain these tools? Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah. Some people are nodding in agreement. Once we put all of this in, the main question that we get is, how do we actually divide this labor, right? It's a lot of stuff. Even for a team of SREs, we've got a bunch of things that are loosely connected to achieve the overall goal of things working reasonably well. But we've got a bunch of things, right? So we've got the developers, we've got hopefully test engineers. Who has dedicated test engineers? Okay, a few, that's very good. What about performance engineers? Who has big enough team who has dedicated? 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay, great. What about release engineers? Anybody with that title in their team? No? Wrong crowd. Okay, support. What does support do? Where does your job stop and support's job start?
You're talking like first and second, third line support?
Yeah. So, okay, who gets paged? Is that you directly? Is there a layer in between? A layer in between?
No, we have frontline and a second level escalation.
Okay.
And then it goes to engineering.
Fine. So these guys are pretty sheltered. Is that what everybody else is doing too? You got another team?
We paging support and dev.
Paging support, and then support when they can't resolve the issue that they get to you. Right, so as you can see, we've got a bunch of things that are already different. What about sysadmin? Is that your job as an SRE? Is that someone else's job? Who's managing their boxes? Okay, well, I keep seeing the same hands up. Is everybody else asleep, or do we just come from different places? Okay, so, this is a popcorn meme here. Once you start talking about these things, nothing is like nicely aligned on PowerPoint slide anymore, right? We've got a bunch of questions, and they don't necessarily have one answer, right? It all depends on your organization. There's also the actual question of, do we have embedded SREs? Do you have like an SRE in a team that's handling that particular thing? Do you have kind of horizontal layer of SREs? Hands up for the first option. Same hands, okay, great, 5, 6, 7. Everybody else for the second option? Okay, so that one wins down or up. So, as I was getting further into that mess, I realized that things get even more messy. So, where are we really? Like, if you go to LinkedIn, and you were to actually scan, the progression of people's job titles, you would probably realize that there is a bunch of rebranding exercises. But obviously, we can set replace. But in reality, can you see this graph? This is an important graph, guys. So the red line is Hawaiian pizza. That's the overall trend of interest in people Googling Hawaiian pizza. And the reason why I picked this one as a comparison is because I personally hate it, and I don't think it's particularly relevant to any of that. So the correlation shouldn't be too high. So you can see that it's more or less static. Well, weirdly enough, in Colombia and Peru, it seems to be increasing in recent years. I'm not sure what's going on there. The blue one is the SRE, right? We've got the increasing trend. People are searching for that. People are learning about that. And people are increasingly seeing themselves as SREs. And that's a battery warning. That's great. So the bottom here is that regardless of how you look at that, it's a phenomenon that is increasing. And as you can see, a conference like this is probably a proof good enough to confirm that this is happening. And there are good reasons for it too. One of which is the tools. Who loves open source? Okay, who hates open source? There you go. I obviously couldn't make big enough graph here, but I just wanted to point out a few things that have been happening in the recent years. And bottom line is that the tools that we're getting as SREs are just getting more and more awesome, like basically every day, right? Who here has used eBPF to dramatically change their visibility into what they do? That just 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. Okay, everybody else, go home after this and check out eBPF, okay? So that's obviously Linux getting more and more awesome, and us being able to read the code when we don't understand what's going on. Absolutely awesome thing, right? The other big thing that happened, Kubernetes. Who's not running on Kubernetes, at least some of their stuff right now? 2 people not running on, 4 people not running on Kubernetes, right? Fine, okay, who is running on Kubernetes? Yeah, that's majority of the crowd, right? All of a sudden, within a few years, we get this project, we get all this visibility, we got all these APIs that all of a sudden we can all agree are a decent enough abstraction of how to run things. And that just happened like that, right? All of that, Jesus, can you actually read that, or is it too small? All of this is basically leading to observability, right? And we've got, I put things like debugging, profiling, continuous profiling. Anybody doing continuous profiling at the stage? Awesome, thank you very much. Monitoring, right? We've got tracing, we've got things like open standards, open tracing. We've got alerting, things for visualization, like Grafana, when you don't actually have to pay money for somebody to give you an awesome graph that, you know, looks great when you talk to your manager. Time series, you know, things like Prometheus and others. Automation, Terraform. All of a sudden, everybody's doing Terraform. Who's not doing Terraform here? Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk later. Things build, you know, who's using Bazel, for example, or like some kind of automated tool that is going to pull in all the dependencies and spit out whatever artifact you have and put it somewhere, right? These are all pretty bloody awesome, right? And if you don't have time and you don't want to learn about any of these things, actually, oh yeah, okay. So this is CNCF. For everybody who's not aware, this is Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And this is their landscape that they keep up to date with the different projects that are actually in that ecosystem. So every one of these logos there, you know, I can barely see them from here. You probably can't see them from there. But if you go to landscape.cncf.io, it's awesome to look at. It just gives you the idea of a scale of this thing, right? How many different things you can pick up, and it's everything. Let me just try to zoom in. Maybe that's actually going to work a little bit, right? So the category have like databases that are cloud native, streaming messaging, application definition, continuous delivery, integration, remote procedure call. gRPC seems to be all the hype right now. Right, it's eating the world. We've got a service meshes, container runtimes. Basically, in each of these categories, you have a plethora of choice right now. And it's all free. You go and you download it from the internet. And that's the beauty of open source, right? That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and build that expertise. There's also this thing, software as a service. So if it makes more sense for you to pay for someone else to figure things out for you so that you improve your time to market, there is so much stuff now, right? You've got things for logs, for metrics, dashboards, APM traces, AI. It's all out there, right? So I'm not going to name drop here because they didn't pay me for that, but it's out there and it's plentiful, right? Another thing is that it's easier to get started than ever, right? This is Homer typing, looking for any key to press. We've got books. You know, obviously I had to plug my own book on the right. These are the books that I expect everybody at least pretends to have read, right? Chaos engineering, I assume that people are mainly familiar with that. It's basically this idea that if we want to make things reliable, let's try to continuously break them and verify that what we think is going to happen is actually happening, right? We've got plenty of tools for that. And they also keep improving. By the way, another plug, I'm going to have a few books downstairs later to give out. So if you're interested, come and get a copy. Just promise you read it, right? So before my battery dies right now, where we're going is basically 3 things, right? We're trying to standardize. And as I mentioned before, some of these things we'll probably never agree on, because they're different and we have different preferences and we have different objectives that we want to do. But there is a layer of normalization, just like we seem to have just all agreed that Kubernetes is the way now and everybody's jumping to that, you know, head first. There is value to being able to have a common language, right? And the easier learning curve. And so, if I was to actually, give it a little Kanban, as one does, I would say this is what it would look like. In to-do, we still have reaching mainstream. We're working on that. In progress, we've got writing up docs, books, training, conferences, and all of that. We're trying to do our bit with this conference. Building even more awesome tools and standardization. And what I would consider done at this stage is, the manifest, obviously, the bootstrapping of the movement, building some pretty awesome tools already, and getting some high-profile early adopters for that. So before it dies, I'm going to wrap up here and take any questions and and ask you, does this actually align with what you're saying? Yeah, nodding is good. Did anybody disagree? Did I say anything here that was outrageously untrue?
So I'm not sure about easier learning curve.
I'm not sure about easier learning curve. I think with the kind of microservices architectures, with Kubernetes, coming back to the initial talk, we need lots of tools to help understand the environment, and I think it's not possible really to have, for very complex distributed systems, a mental map of what's going on.
So I think I would agree here that we did complicate our lives a lot, right? And now we're basically trying to make them easier again, right? So for everybody out there who has experienced, a death by microservices, when somebody decided they needed to cut things into microservices and they never recovered from that, that's definitely something that I can, empathize with. But I would argue that, on like a process level, for example, with eBPF that nobody apparently has looked at yet, you get quite amazing visibility that might be actually better than what we had before, right? So yeah, I think I personally just kind of made peace with the fact that we moved on to microservices and everything is a microservice regardless of whether it should be or not. And now I'm trying to damage control, how we how we look into that and making sure that we know what's going on. Cool. Other questions, anybody? Look, I'm so self-sustainable. I do both questions and answer them.
Hi, sorry, I was just trying to find out from you, do you have a preference for a model of SRE that should be implemented in an organization? So obviously we have the kitchen sink, we have embedded, we have tools. I've come from a different model, and my current client is asking for a model I don't agree with because I don't think it suits the organization. So if I were to ask you, your experience, what would you think is the kind of the model?
The best one.
Yes, preferred.
Right. Well, kind of one of my points I was trying to make is that there's probably not one best answer to any of these things, right? It's going to depend on the client, it's going to depend on the situation. I think one of the big factors is the scale of that, right? If you have one person who's an SRE, whichever model you choose is going to look mostly the same, right? So I don't think I can necessarily point out to one as better than others from my personal experience. I see some nodding here. Let me share with that.
You want me to say I agree? I do agree. So I can just say from personal experience, even where I work at today, I work very closely with the SRE teams. And so there really is no model. It starts off with, hi, these are the tools that we have, and let's formalize how to empower people to use those tools. And then from there, there's your organic process normally. That's what I see.
Yeah, I suppose why I was asking is that so I work for a consultancy and we're trying to embed SRE for them. Before I joined the project, they've already done this very sexy RAC with McKinsey where they've taken out the AppOps team and just kept in an SRE, which at the beginning, I don't really agree with that because I think you still kind of need the AppOps team to an extent for the SRE to embed nicely. So I have to go back now and try and rework the model and sell it to them. So I suppose that's why I'm asking, because they've got people like AWS as some of the consultants, and they are pushing against changing the model they've already defined.
I would say take the tech out and have a conversation and take the tech out. I know that sounds strange, but have a conversation and take the tech out. And what I mean by take the tech out, there's so many tools and things like that. Start off with what are your outcomes? What are your general outcomes? What is your culture? What should it look like? What do you feel like it should look like? And then start there, because half of the thing is also a cultural thing. And so you have, like you said, you have other people coming in and saying a thing. Take the tech out and have that formalized conversation and start building around that to figure out how to optimize it. And then that would be their organic model, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would agree. And just one more variable to add to that is I always try to optimize for context switch penalty, to minimize that. So if you can, and you have big enough scale, staying vertical like this means that you're going to do fewer hops and spend less mental time on context switching between things as you would in a more kind of across thing. But like I said before, it's probably not always going to be possible, right? So, yeah, I'm guessing no golden bullets there.
I think it's more the fact that we have other people involved. There are 6 or 7 suppliers and trying to get a piece of the pie. So you're not pushing against the client, you're pushing against your other consultants. So it's that politics that is what is holding it back. I mean, if we were the only people, we can go in and say, look, this is what you need to do. But like you've got other consultancies there saying, no, we want it this way. So I think that's where we're coming from.
Yeah, people problem. Those are messy. All right. I think we had a question right there. Can we? Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah, nice one. Cool. So I'm not a SRE engineer. I'm a software developer, right? And I'm coming from the perspective of, for example, just finished designing, releasing, and handing over an application that's now 18 months old to the SRE team. And I find I'm spending a lot of my time supporting them, right? Like, let's say 3 or 4 hours a week supporting them on, this application that I've handed over. I want to be spending my time writing new applications. So I guess my question is, when we're talking about things like monitoring, automation, where does the engineer's job end and the SRE's job start? Because coming from their perspective, right, they're a bunch of smart people, but this is a brand new application to them that they've never seen. How do we work together to make sure that when we're creating the monitors and the alerts, they're helpful for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so very good question. It goes right into, the point. It kind of sounds like when you said release it to the SREs, I was like, oh, it sounds like you're going to move, just throw it over the fence. My personal bias and my personal preference is that the SRE work with the application team without taking the ownership of actually running that. Because then they basically become support. And supporting things you don't know too much about sucks. And I'm sure you can appreciate that as you imagine someone else's code. You don't know the alerts. This looks like it might be bogus. This is bringing me in the middle of the night. Probably not a good place to start. So I think, in the way that you were describing the situation, I think the first problem to address will be the ownership of that. And unless you agreed with them that, they're the one running, owning the production running of that thing day to day, and that works for your model, I think that's a little bit risky to begin with, right? So, again, people problem, you're going to have to talk to them. I'm sorry. You're going to have to discuss that. You want to add something?
I was just going to say a comment that what we found might be a bit late for you right now, but what we found works well is to have the SRE embedded in the design stage. And so, for example, we make defining metrics and implementing them as part of the definition of done. So nothing is actually ever released without it. And so you don't actually find yourself a few months down the line going back into the application and trying to figure out what exactly do you want to measure. So yeah, might be a bit too late, but collaboration is key to make it work.
Yeah, that said, obviously, real life is, we always get some legacy stuff that needs to be improved and, this has been in a corner and it's breaking, but it doesn't sound like that's your situation, right?
No, I think the comment made is really what we've learned from that, right? That we can't just chuck it over the fence when it's done. It's SRE need to be involved earlier to like help us build those monitors, build those alerts, so that they can say that looks good, but this is what we actually need, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, no hot potatoes.
yeah.
Just to add to that context, so I come from the ops world.
Sorry.
Just to add to the context, I'm heading the level 2 team, do my self-development, scripting and all that. So what we tend to do is we get involved with the development team right at the pre-production stage. I know the design stage is really early, but we don't really hear that. So we get kind of like involved in pre-production stage. My team basically kind of take ownership on the Grafana metrics, ELK stack. So when we are creating the dashboards and stuff with the development team, we're kind of learning at the same time as well. So that kind of helps us a lot. I know what you say, a lot of my complaints, the development team is, they kind of like, okay, this is your world now, go and support it. And then you go back and forth for the next month. Things are breaking, 3 a.m, and you're no one to actually reach out. So the best thing is, again, collaboration is the key. Get them involved at the early stage. Get them actually hands-on from logging, database schemas, I think anything observability-wise, get them involved, your ops, SRE. And you'll find out, I think personally I found out, I've worked on that model, and down the line 2-3 months, I think the developers moved on. Yeah. I think probably I've known more than the development in terms of business and where the code is, because I've been actually involved and looking into it. But yeah, collaboration is definitely at an early age. That's the solution for me.
So are you an SRE?
No, so I'm not an SRE. So it's quite funny because I used to do a lot of automation, scripting, production. I come from a financial trading background, looking at business data and everything. And I was like, what should be my title? I'm struggling here. I mean, I'm not DevOps. I'm not a developer. I can do a bit of development. I'm an ops guy as well. And then finally, a few years back, I heard SRE. I'm like, this seems like my title, right? Now, it's been 2 years I've been trying to convince my executive management team to set up a proper SRE model because I could see the benefits. And obviously, I've been struggling there. So I'll probably get some tips from you guys as well who've implemented that, how to convince the senior executive level what's the end goal is, really reliability, and that's what we care about. So, but yeah, that's the reason I'm here, to understand how can I basically get the pointers, push it to the senior executive team. This is beneficial. What we're already doing is similar to what SRE does. We just give it a proper culture, like a DevOps culture.
So it comes back to the question I asked, because you just said something about the application team owning the application, right? Which is the model that's not happening where my new client, because they want the SRE to take on everything, build the application, do everything. And I'm saying, of course, the SRE can't do all of that. You have to stay. But the other consultants are saying, no, the SRE must take on everything, which is the kitchen sink, and is a big organization. You can't have a kitchen sink for a big organization. So, like you said, it's a people problem. I have to find a way around it, but it's not a model that's working.
Yeah. And one of the arguments you can use is that it's really hard to keep people when they're firefighting, like most of the time. Oh, by the way, I'm hiring for not firefighting. So if you're interested in that, let me know. All right, I've got time for one more question. Oh, sorry, your hand was up the whole time. My bad.
I was just there's another model to look at it. I mean, I was working for building an Internet of Things platform. And I like the book of SRE from Google. And one of the title what they have is what you build is what you own. So we have this SRE in a federated way rather than a central team. So we had this development team and couple of resources kind of playing in rotational basis the SRE kind of role. And that kind of worked, but I don't know if that's going to scale. I think that's another question I wanted to understand, whether we should have this federated or we should have a central SRE team in an organization who can be reused and kind of across multiple projects or platforms they can be leveraged. So what's your thought on that?
Well, I think it's going to be more case by case, and we can talk a little bit more in detail later in the day. But yeah, one of the things that you said is also reminding me, there's also some SRE teams that actually own platforms and tools, right? And then that kind of naturally shift some of that responsibility onto them. And that's really hard to change because that's actually a tool they own, right? And that's the one that breaks. And oftentimes it's difficult to prove that somebody seeing some kind of issue is not your fault unless you have a really good visibility into that. So that's definitely a challenge. But yeah, there's a lot of variables to that. So I would just kind of talk case by case on that.